patriotism that horrifies you. So anything that can give an advantage to French companies, you're against, because you are France that subjects itself to the EU, unfair international competitions. The farmers didn't see you support them against this unfair competition. The industrialists didn't. Oh, yes, a number of large corporations saw you. Those are the ones who were bought out by large U.S. corporations to the detriment of national interest, Alstom, Technip, and there was a whole series of many with rather problematic conflicts of interest with the former bank at which you work. So you don't have a national spirit. You don't think in the superior interest of the nation. I'll always blame you for that. You're defending private interests. The French people are aware of that. The problem is behind that. There's a lot of hardship at Whirlpool. There are companies that are offshoring. And that it's not an anecdote, Mr. Macron. These are companies that you've sold. SFR, for example, to your friend Mr. Draghi, the head of BFM. 6,000 jobs lost.
For 3 minutes, Madame Le Pen has been explaining her strategy for fighting unemployment in France. There isn't one. Your strategy...
I've given you everything. I've told you everything you haven't done.
Madame Le Pen, what's extraordinary is that your strategy, and it's normal, for decades this has been going on, your strategy is quite simply to lie a lot and to list all the difficulties and problems of the country, but you don't propose anything. If you had observed what has happened in recent years, the charges paid by the tax credit for competitiveness benefits all
small
companies.
Businesses didn't benefit from that.
That's why in my project I propose to cut the charges which are paid by small and medium-sized enterprises. I want to cut corporation tax.
All companies, including for the large companies, whereas I give total priority to small businesses. They're the ones that create jobs. You're making life easier for big business again. It's normal, they're your friends. Where you have drinks at La Rotonde.
The French deserve better than this. They deserve the truth, not insinuations. You say you are very well informed. You know reality is very different. I was not a minister when SFR was sold, and it belonged to a totally private
company. Oh, really?
You
weren't minister? You told that lie in front of 10,000 people at the debate we had. And when that question was asked of you, of course you were minister. You were leading all these issues. And what Mr. Montebourg refused for SFR be sold to Mr. Draghi, the day Mr. Montebourg was replaced by you, Mr. Macron, well, immediately you signed the deed of sale. That's the truth.
Mrs. Le Pen, SFR belonged to a private group called Vivendi. We are in the state where we respect private property. It's the Vivendi group that sold SFR. So you're making a lot of mistakes. You have been, and it doesn't help the country to move on. Nobody wanted to sell SFR. When you have a private group which is owned by private capital, look in your files,
Yes, I'll find that for you immediately.
I know the files
January
very well.
2015, before Parliament. I took the decision for Alstom. You said to Mr. Dupont-Aignan, it's not me. January 2015, before Parliament, I have the decision to allow G to take a stake in Alstom. I personally.
Mrs. Le Pen, you're not talking about the same subject. You're talking about General Electric and Alstom.
The day after Mr. Montebourg left, you granted, whereas they were refusing the sale of SFR. That's the reality. Why don't you just accept it? Accept it. That's what you do best, to break up companies and do M&A. You can do that very well. There's no difficulty.
You're reading a file that does not correspond to the case we were discussing, which shows that you are not prepared, well prepared.
Sold against the interests of France.
General Electric Alstom, Mr. Montberg fought very hard. We can look at the details of the file as you are mixing the different files up. One is, SFR is in telephony, and the other one makes turbines and industrial equipment. It isn't the same sector. You're mixing the two sectors.
You can sell everything. The only problem is that you can sell everything, but not to the benefit of the national interest.
Fighting against unemployment calls for in-depth reforms. You can shake things up.
El Khomri law, deregulation, etc. That's what you want to do.
Madame Le Pen doesn't want to talk about substantive matters. She wants to talk about the past. What we need today, and I say, is simplicity for small and medium-sized enterprise. I propose we need to have more pragmatism. We need to have a policy in favor of investment. It is indispensable to fight against unemployment. There is no fatality. You are not proposing anything to fight against unemployment. Your knowledge of the files is very approximative. I propose to create jobs for self-employed people, SMEs, and large companies.
We'd like to hear your suggestions on something that's very important to the French people. The working week. It seems like neither of you in your political platform have decided to change the 35-hour working week. Mrs. Le Pen, you're okay with 35 hours?
Well, I want negotiations to happen by sector. Mr. Macron wants negotiations to take place by company. It's fratricidal. It's fratricidal because, of course, negotiation by company is to pit companies one against the other. You're going to take unfair national competition, whereas they're suffering unfair international competition. You know full well that in the sectors, there'll be the large companies that, of course, will be able to adjust the working time, but not the small companies. So, obviously, they'll go under. That's your plan. The big eat the small. It's the law of the fittest, of the strongest. I'm opposed to that. If negotiations happen, they have to be by sector and not by company. I note, for that matter, that Mr. Macron wants to have an El Khomri law to the power of 10 by executive order. We don't quite know what's in it. I assume there'll be the scrapping of the indefinite term contract or the roadmap of the EU, and you're ticking the boxes with a great deal of discipline. You're very disciplined. You're very disciplined in respect to the EU. Okay, but this outright deregulation, this breakup of labor laws, obviously will be a policy that creates more precariousness, not jobs, but additional unemployment, as long as we don't change the economic model defended by the system that is behind you, Mr. Macron, of all the socialist ministers who are supporting you. Mr. Le Foll, Madame Royal, Taubira, Mr. Cazeneuve.
I'm waiting for your answer on the 35-hour week.
I know you're trying. Yeah.
It's interesting, you're not answering the question.
You're trying to get us to forget that you were part of a government that implemented the El Khomri law. Once again, that made labor even more precarious, didn't create any jobs, but higher unemployment since you left the government than when you joined. But I see there that you refuse to assume responsibility for that.
Thank you for your implicit homage to me.
I know once again that you don't want to assume that responsibility. So the measures you're recommending today, okay, we've seen what they are. If you say, right, we're going to do that, but worse, well, I say that obviously we must radically turn our backs on that policy, and we must have a policy that protects jobs and that develops small businesses, because they're the ones that create jobs in our country.
Mr. Macron, your turn to speak. You are not questioning that 35-hour work week.
What's extraordinary is that you never answer the questions. You're always talking about the past and about other people. The French will understand that you have nothing to propose. It's wonderful. I'm listening to you. You talk about everything and about nothing.
I answered that.
I'm answering the question, which is, and I want to know, what are small and medium-sized enterprises asking for? You asked the business leaders. They want more visibility. They want, whatever their size, I'm not talking only about large groups. The large groups manage competitiveness very well. The medium in size, from very small to very large businesses, they want more adaptation to economic reality. A business in the construction sector, which has 2 employees, doesn't have the same experience as a digital startup or an automobile company which has 500 employees. So we must give them the possibility of negotiating a majority agreement at corporate level. Only large companies can do so today in certain circumstances. The shipbuilding yards in Saint-Nazaire save jobs by negotiating an agreement.
You sold them to the Italians. I'm sorry you sold them to the Italians.
I didn't sell the shipbuilding yard. They almost disappeared 2 years ago. They signed an agreement with the unions. There was part-time work, and they then had a good order book. They weren't sold to anyone. I was in the presidential campaign at the time. You can attribute me all the sins for the last 30 years. I've been involved in politics for a much shorter time than you.
No, it's been a while that this deal was in the offing.
You have a big problem with industrial issues. You don't know the files at all.
It's been a while since this file was on your desk.
For my part, I signed contracts for ships to be built in those shipyards. And I say, quite simply, they signed those agreements which created more flexibility and preserved jobs. That's what I want for other businesses, and this is what business leaders are asking for. I'm also in favor, notably for the smallest companies, there should be sectorial agreements. A business with 2 employees does not negotiate corporate agreements because there are no trade unions. The small retailers, the small business leaders, it's at the sectorial level that we can negotiate more flexibility of labor laws which will allow people to hire people more easily. Our economy needs to make hiring more simple.
In the sectors, there are large and small, not just small companies.
And you're also in favor of sectorial agreements, but we must allow the small and large companies to sign these agreements. And that's what will revitalize our economy and will stop the destruction of jobs like in the recession in 2009.
So you assume that it's the employment labor code that creates unemployment. That's a strange vision. I mean, my principle, and this is confirmed by the small businesses, and I see far many than you do, because around my table, there are small businesses, around your table, very often big business. You don't show contempt for the employees of Whirlpool. They gave me a very good welcome. They know that my plan defends them because they know what is killing them off. It's your policy, the policy of unfair competition, such that the state, as strategist, doesn't intervene. The big eat the small. Companies go off seeking workers, low-cost workers, as was the case. But I'm offering them to tax companies that relocate. They will no longer relocate abroad if they don't have profits, if they have no benefit to go to a country where wages are very low. If they're taxed, when they re-import their products, then they will no longer leave because there'll be no financial interest in it for them. That's the first thing. Secondly, I want to put in place a sovereign fund that will allow us to intervene in case such as Vivart that has been broken up by vulture funds. The state must intervene and trust a sovereign fund to business leaders to have the 2 qualities, the state duration and the private sector of efficiency, with offering reasonable yields when you consider once again that the law of the toughest of the strongest must apply, and it's normal that companies break one another up. That's what you organized when you were at the head of the bank.
We should push forward, Mr. Macron.
There's something which is called the Agency for State Shareholding, which means the state can invest in a company. When Peugeot was under threat, the state increased its share of the capital to save the company.
Well, you see, I'm proposing it.
It's interesting because you're in great solutions.
This is a sovereign fund that I would entrust to business leaders.
Already exists. The public investment bank
It's
already
not a
exists.
bank that I want, it's a sovereign fund. Miss, don't play with me. I see that you're trying to play with me, the teacher and the pupil, but it's not my thing.
The country deserves a better debate. In the case of Whirlpool, what you propose is nothing. First of all, you don't respect people. You don't respect people. I heard the anger of people. I spent hours with the workers of Whirlpool. You spent 15 minutes on the parking lot of Whirlpool. You didn't even go into the company premises.
Where you were protected from journalists, without the journalists, with your personal
I met
cameras.
the employees, and that is what it means to respect people. When you were playing to the cameras, I was with the representatives of the employees because I respect them. And you know what? They understood that you don't propose anything to them.
They booed you, they booed you. And they said, out, out, because they know that my campaign,
You
I
don't
spoke
propose
about
anything
them.
to them. They're angry.
I shed the light.
And in the evening, you issued a communique, a statement, proposing the nationalization of Whirlpool.
That it be protected by the state until a buyer is found.
Some of you have had problems. That was the mistake Mr. Hollande made with Florange.
And you went to see them and say, right, globalization, that's what globalization is like. We'll give
I
you some
told them
training.
that I'm going to fight for reinvestment in their site. I'm going to fight so that you have...
You're really not credible on this, Mr. Bancroft. Do you realize that?
I am much more credible than you are because I am not being cynically fueling
That's not
my...
what the employees of
by
Whirlpool
Please, we
say.
must push
lies.
forward.
I have had a number of victories and a number of failures, but I have always fought.
Victories to protect jobs or victories to protect companies that are buying each other up and scaling back?
We have saved a lot of companies.
If you would please listen to us for 2 minutes, we do have...
I have never done what you did the other day to take advantage of the distress of the workers.
I never went to hide in a room with trade union representatives. I go and see the workers. The workers. With the workers, not to hide in a small room.
If you please,
That's the big difference between us.
we cannot dwell on this for too long.
Attendez, c'est inaudible. Alors, on va continuer.
We can't hear ourselves think anymore. We need to push forward. There will be other opportunities to come back to the issues that the French people are facing. We'll be talking about taxes and purchasing power. Many French people are expressing their frustration with the current tax system. Mr. Macron, what is your opinion on this frustration?
What I propose is to make savings in order to cut taxes paid by households and companies. We must be clear. If we don't make any savings, we can't promise tax cuts. That's a promise that is not credible. I know that that's what Marine Le Pen does, but people aren't that stupid. So the state today has a deficit, which is not a good thing for us. The state and all public administrations have a deficit. So I want to make 70 billion euros of savings in order to cut taxes and charges paid by companies, to reduce the charges paid by businesses 6 points down and 10 points lower charges for the minimum wage, and to reduce the corporate income tax to 25%. So I propose for the households to get rid of the residence tax for 80% of our fellow citizens, which represents 10 billion euros. So I cut the taxes paid by businesses. I cut also what citizens pay, residents pay, and this is my fiscal policy. If growth is better than I expect, I'm very cautious. I have very cautious 1.8% growth. I hope we can go beyond that. Then I will reallocate the savings to cutting income tax and for the benefit of households.
Mrs. Le Pen, your suggestions when it comes to tax system, is this frustration something that you felt when you were visiting people?
So you're assuming your responsibilities.
Non, mais vous n'avez pas participé aux grands choix économiques.
You didn't take part in the major economic decisions. Very good. Okay, you're a member of a government that generated an additional 35 billion in taxes, 35 billion of additional taxes during the 5-year term, but it's not you, not you.
I have never been in charge of that.
So you want to reduce the residence tax. Okay, I'm happy with that. For small residence tax, 10 billion. You want to increase the social contribution by 15 points for pensioners and workers. Mr. Pisani-Ferry, one of your advisors, said clearly 60% of pensioners will have to pay more.
We need your response to what Mr. Macron said.
What do I do? I cut by 3 points the wage charges of all those who work. Why? Because today, when you get your payslip, your gross salary, and then you have your social contributions. I will reduce those contributions by 3 points because I want to go as far as I can. I want universal insurance, employment insurance, so that everybody can have indemnities if they are unemployed. So I will be getting rid for all workers of their employee social contribution, and I will replace that by an increase in CSG. All those who work, craftsmen, self-employed people, entrepreneurs, farmers, retailers, civil servants, employees, they will have a gain in purchasing power because the rise in the CSG will be lower than the fall in charges. Their purchasing power will increase. The 40% of people who have the lowest retirement pensions and pay the low rates of CSG will pay less, and 60% of retirees who pay the normal rate will have an increase of the CSG of 1.7 points. And the wealthier of the wealthiest will, in order to have a more smarter system, there is no magic in finance.
You are 4 minutes ahead.
So I will take the 4 minutes. All the other retirees, this rise will be offset by getting rid of the residence tax.
The residence tax that you're giving with the right hand, the fact you're taking back with the left hand through a tax. But since you're a socialist, you're going to say, well, it costs nothing, it's the state that pays.
I'm not saying that. Let me tell you the truth. Everybody will have an increase in purchasing power, except the richest retirees.
Well, obviously, Mr. Macron obviously criticizes for this. I have very significant measures to boost spending power through a reduction of 10% of the first 3 income tax brackets, by increasing the benefits for widowers that were scrapped by the socialists because they could have made an effort on that, by making overtime hours free of tax, clear measures for purchasing power, bonuses for employment below 1,500 euros that I finance through imports and not via tax, reduced energy prices, down 5% because there have been successive hikes that are weighing on the budget of families. I'm boosting small pensions because you're going to knock the
No, I will be increasing the small retirement
They're
pensions.
in a situation for many of them that is really terrible. They just can't make ends meet, and they continue to bear the brunt of additional measures and sacrifices. You said, right, housing benefit, we're not going to continue to fund 20 million of these housing benefits. If you reduce that, well, you see that there are some who will no longer be able to find a home. And for the young people, the under 27s, they need to have their housing benefit increased by 25%. And also, I'm thinking of the families. You're not really thinking much about the families. The families by restoring family benefit, family allowance. That was cut. The government that you were a member of, the socialist government that reduced that, and to revert to universal child allowance, that for all the families have had to bear the brunt of all the measures of the government that you took part in on their budget. Yes, I mean, that's the principle of universality, absolutely. So, you see, I mean, I'm the candidate of spending power. You, Mr. Macron, you're the candidate of the power to buy France, to break it up. But it's important to know the philosophy. Everything's for sale. Everything's can be bought. Men can be bought and sold. And Mr. Berger, one of your supporters, mentioned you only see human relations in terms of what it brings in terms of the dividends that can be derived from that. It's not at all my vision. I believe that giving, the efforts that are made by volunteers in association helpers, 8 million that I'll turn to give an additional trimester. Otherwise, the 8 million helpers wouldn't be able to bear that cost. The voluntary sector that's often forgotten, that's one of the key components of our French identity. You realize, in my vision, Mr. Macron, not everything is for sale, not everything is bought, not everything is the subject of a financial measure, financial statistics. France is far more than
You're
that.
right. France is something quite different. It's an open civilization with generous principles, the reverse of everything you represent. It's not your vision of families. It's what your father repeated a few days ago in an unworthy way. And the constant battle that you have fought in the European Parliament, cutting credits for family planning. So you're not well placed to talk about the family. Your vision of the family is not that of the French family. I have a question to ask you. How do you finance all that?
Well, I'll find savings for you immediately. Take a look. The EU, 9 billion euros a year. That can fund.
6 billion.
You
6
forget the
billion
excise customs duties.
on
You
average.
forget customs duties. So, in fact, you're less technical than what you seem to indicate. You're not as aware of that.
We'll be coming to savings in just a few minutes. Let's talk about tax.
We have a long list of the generous reforms of Madame Le Pen, but how is she going to finance all that? How is she going to fund all that?
It's their money, giving it back to the French people. It's their money. It's not you that generates
going
that
to take
money.
the
It's
money
not
from?
the government.
Mrs. Le
It's
Pen.
their money.
Who are
We
you going
give
to
it
take the
back to
money
them.
from? Where are you going to
And that's
find the money
legitimate.
to finance all
Emmanuel
that?
Macron and Marine Le Pen.
The European Union.
You
9
need
billion
150
a year.
billion euros.
Immigration. A colossal cost. I've only kept 15 billion per year in savings. I was very reasonable in my calculations. There's social fraud against you haven't fought.
Oh, it's going to stop overnight. As soon as you're president, people will stop cheating, and there will be no more tax fraud overnight. Overnight, wonderful, fantastic. I don't want to even try
show you.
that.
I'll show you what I can do to find social
I don't
fraud.
want to try, and I don't think the French want to try either with you.
Don't speak on their behalf.
I'm not speaking on their behalf.
But you're chosen by default by a whole set of people, so you need to show a little less arrogance before the election.
I take the French as adults. They are adults. I don't lie to them. And you lie.
Seems to me that you
a lot.
tried to treat them as
Permanently.
children a little.
You have just drawn up a long list of reforms, and you don't say how you will fund them. The day you obtain your 6 billion savings from the EU, but we have to pay what we owe the EU. Look what the UK is going to have to do with Brexit. It will have to pay between 60 and 80 billion euros. From the very beginning, it will have to pay between 60 and 80 billion euros at the beginning of Brexit. So leaving the euro euro, leaving the EU, will cost money. We can talk about the euro later.
Something we'll come to.
But you don't fund what you promise. I want our fellow citizens, in regard to the list that you have just, the people who are helping others, the non-profit organizations, I will support them. And how will I've told you how I will finance the tax cuts and the lowering of charges. You're going to give presents, you're going to give gifts. But somebody will have to pay for your reforms. You you don't say how you're going to fund things. Your project is not open to
return money to the French people is a present.
I'm not going to give it to anybody. When you cut taxes,
your friends, the financial powers,
if you haven't cut expenditure, everybody can understand that.
You don't want to touch.
If you please, we'll get back to this.
So either you're going to increase the deficit and then have recourse to financial, or increase taxes during your 5-year mandate, or increase the debt, and then it's the future generations, our children, who will pay. And
you did 300 billion in debt.
We'll get back to this.
Oh, it's tough, really, to
I assume totally the results of
my
government.
Let's not go round in circles. We will come back to this.
Madame Le Pen is blaming me for everything that's gone wrong over the last 20
4
years.
that you were advisor and minister is not enough. Start by doing that. You know that it's a work of truth and honesty to assume before the French people the results.
I assume the responsibility for what I did as a minister. You're attributing things to me which I didn't do. You're attributing things to me that happened before I was minister, and you are lying. You are lying.
Let's push forward.
Like all extremists, by the way.
Emmanuel Macron, you are far ahead.
Why are you having to insulting your opponent?
I'm not insulting you. If somebody has been insulting, it has been you.
I don't think I use the slightest insult.
When you say I don't respect the body of a woman by referring to Mr. Berger and uterine
We weren't coming to assisted reproductive technology.
Motherhood. It's a lie. I have always been against motherhood,
surrogate motherhood that's happening elsewhere, that in fact that's endorsed in France. In fact, you're creating such networks abroad. It's despicable in terms of selling the human body, but it's cynical and hypocritical.
I'm against surrogate motherhood completely. When you have a child in France, you prefer not to recognize any rights for that child. I don't believe in that. I believe in generosity.
Okay, let's push forward. Marine Le Pen.
Price of selling.
I'm against commercialization of
modern slavery.
I'm against a child being made to suffer.
Well, he can benefit from guardianship.
But the child will be able to die in the street because he will not have any help, or she will not have any help. A wonderful society.
Marine Le Pen, you have a lot of time left.
Let's be serious here.
Your project is not serious.
Let's get back to something that's very interesting to all of the people watching. Social protection. I would like to know what advances you want to have in reimbursement by the social security system. Mrs. Le Pen, first of all.
I want to save the social protection system first off. The reality is today this protection system is in danger. You've seen that the goal is to seek to dismantle it in some shape or form. We're talking about funding here. Mr. Macron, you made a whole set of proposals of reimbursement for eyewear, etc., but you remained extremely vague. What is it, the eyewear? The whole spectacles, at what level? We won't know more before the election. What's for sure, once again, a lot of savings to be made without reducing the benefits that are granted, notably through